Hi, I'm Jeff Jower, and I'm here with Rick Levine for a Planet Pulse special focus on the sign Cancer.
Cancer is the first water sign in the Zodiac, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and water astrologically has to do with feeling. But the most interesting things about each of the 12 signs can come from looking at what the zodiac animal or symbol actually means. And Cancer is simply Latin for crab. The crab lives in the intertidal zone. This is the place where the ocean meets the land, and it's the most nutrient-rich place on the planet, and it's the place of the most dynamic change because the tide comes up and down every day. And so the typical Cancer crab lives in fear of being washed away by the tides, and yet there's always an initiation going on, the change, because the tide never sits still.
So Cancer is a sign that begins one of the seasons of the year, but as you pointed out, Rick, it's in an environment which isn't necessarily stable or constant. So the motion of the crab isn't straightforward.
Well, yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because, a crab has no backbone. So what it's done is it's developed an exoskeleton so that its outer shell gives it the strength and the stability that we mammals have from our internal backbone. But the thing is with the Cancer, with the crab, there's such fear of being washed away by the tides that the exoskeleton isn't enough for the fearful crab to hide behind. It goes and finds a larger shell from an animal that's no longer using its shell, and it crawls in there, and it's still fearful. So it takes that whole thing and it drags it into a cave or under a rock so that the tides can change and the crab is safe. And herein comes the metaphor for why Cancer has to do with home and family. Because our homes are just our exoskeletons. Our families represent the shell that we have emotionally that gives us consistency while the world goes on changing.
Yeah, very well put. Another way to get a sense of the meaning of any sign is to look at its relationship to the other signs. Cancer, as Rick pointed out, it's the first water sign of the zodiac. Water is the element of emotion and feeling and of memory. We initiate in Aries, we have a physical sense of reality in Taurus, an intellectual opening in Gemini, but we do not have that family connection to roots, memory, and history in the story of the signs until we get to Cancer. Cancer, as the first water sign, represents personal emotion, the emotion that is connected to my direct immediate experience and to my family origins. The other water signs, Scorpio, for example, has to do with emotion connected to interrelationships with people not necessarily belonging to our tribe or family group. And the last water sign, Pisces, has to do with emotion that's connected to everything, whether it's all of humanity through collective compassion or from a spiritual perspective. So Cancer, cardinality of water is emotion or feeling that has a personal identification. And even though that direction may wobble or wander or even go backwards, it's still arguably the most personal sign of the zodiac.
Yeah, and I think Cancers as a sign certainly tend to personalize their feelings. In astrology, every planet relates to a sign, and every sign relates to a planet. And here we use the word planet in the true astrological sense. That includes the sun and the moon and Pluto. And the planet that relates to Cancer is the moon. You think of the tides that I was talking about earlier. Well, the moon in some ways is the most personal of all the planets.
It's the closest.
It's the closest. It's the one that we feel.
And we see it change.
We see
it's so moody.
It's moody. And the word mood and moon connect etymologically. And I think that the moon also represents the mother, the mom. And so here we come to that side of Cancer, which has to do with taking our hard outer shell, our exoskeleton, and putting it around someone we love. Giving them the safety and the security of our nurturing love, which is the kind of feeling that's attached often to Cancer, the maternal instinct or the maternal love. Even the baby growing in the womb becomes a place that you float in, like a crab floating in the ocean, except it has that hard outer, kind of safety of the outer shell. And so that until the baby is born, it really doesn't need to know anything about self or other or food or everything's taken care of. It feels connected to everything. And I think here's the big dilemma of Cancer, and that is that Cancer wants to feel connected to everything and everyone, and yet on some level it isn't. And so it looks to regain that connection, but it's always afraid of rejection or afraid of being cast out or separated from being a part of the loving, nurturing matrix.
That's great. And one of the great strengths of that loving, nurturing quality of Cancer is not just directed towards a family, it can be directed towards a business or an organization in which one is the nurturing caretaker of that group, and giving life and nourishing that life is a great strength of this sign. And as we've covered in a number of ways, part of the weakness of this sign is walling off things that don't fit into its cozy little niche.
Well, and it's not only walling off things that don't fit in, but it's also sometimes walling off things that do. In other words, there is something about the Cancer energy that has to do with invisibility. One of the days that I learned more about Cancer than many other days of my life, I was sitting at an ocean and I was by some cliffs, and there were all these crabs like coming out of the little holes in the edges of the cliff, drying off their what do you call them? Their claws. Thank you. And they were doing their thing in the sun, and I was at the top of the cliff, and all I had to do is look at them, and they all disappeared. And there's this invisibility. There's the Harry Potter invisibility cloak that a Cancer might have when you might ask a Cancer, did you have something you wanted to say where you think, no? Yeah, it's that
the
pulling
intern,
the holding in behind the shell because of fear of being recognized or fear of actually having to follow through on externalizing and pushing out beyond what the safety of one's own shell is.
So that's interesting. That a critical issue then is, are we pulling back, whether we're Cancers or not, out of an irrational fear or in a real sense of understanding what is safe? I'm Jeff Jower.
And for Planet Pulse, I'm Rick Levine.